I begin?
Yes.
My name is Ramisa, and the issue I'm bringing forth to the table today is the fugitives captured from the wars conducted by America are not tried under the U.S. system. My proposition is to extend the U.S. court system. My main claim is that U.S. policy of terror detainees harms the goal of democracy. The points I'm going to be talking about today are the rights of prisoners, the U.S. serving as a model, and the impact of U.S. foreign policy. So, for my first point, the U.S. keeps detainees without regard for human rights. Prisoners are not given the same rights under the Geneva Convention, which include the right to fair trial. So, what is the Geneva Convention? It is an international agreement governing the status and treatment of the captured and wounded. Republican senators argue that a reinterpretation would put U.S. soldiers at risk abroad because it would allow other states to bend the rules, such as suing officials for war crimes. Also, people are kept in captivity without sufficient evidence for their crimes because they were found in a combat zone. The vast majority of prisoners of war were taken away as a result of combat within an area. From a CNN documentary, it was reported that a total of 90% of prisoners were wrongfully accused. The term combat zones is too vague, and now that wartime is now peacetime, it would be proper to re-examine the detainees. Without giving the detainees a trial or bringing them to custody without proper evidence gives the U.S. an unfair advantage and reflects sheer self-interest. My second point is that the U.S. model is imitated by Middle East regimes. Nearly a decade after the war in 1991, the dictatorship in Iraq was not dismantled because the civilians there still have no rights to vote, freedom of speech, association, or press. Even during the time of war, the U.S. did not allow such rights to come into play. Similar to U.S. foreign methods, the Middle East takes people as prisoners only to silence them from public eyes. Under Bush's military control of Iraq critics of the government, they were thrown into prison. If people are expressing their concerns of the government, why aren't they being heard? That is the basic principle of democracy, which is to hear the voice of the people. My final point is nations return to operating without democratic reform because of U.S. policy under the authority of the American-led government of Iraq. Police arrested the leader of the protest, even though the protest was completely nonviolent. Even after America declared peacetime, people are not allowed to assemble. To convert a country to democracy, the U.S. must introduce habeas corpus. A study by John Yu, a psychologist specializing in human behavior, was conducted to count the number of visual learners to auditory learners. The majority resulted as visual learners. To practice the steps that would lead to an arrest and the process that happens after once that arrest is made, one must be shown a proper example. The people have to choose how they want their government to function due to the denotative meaning of democracy, which is the voice of the people. Washington appointed secular English-speaking Iraqi politicians who were congenial to U.S. interests, a minority that does not reflect the majority of the population. So, to sum things up, the aspiration to achieve democracy is harmed because the conditions of the Geneva Convention are not met. The Middle East repeats both their history and American history on their soil, and the voice of the people are not heard. In conclusion, as cliche as this sounds, two wrongs don't make a right. The Geneva Convention prohibits cruel, humiliating, and degrading treatment. The U.S. did not ratify the two additional protocols of 1977, which clarified the fundamentals of human treatment. One of the U.S.'s prized successes is the introduction of the United Nations. Why are they straying away from the entity they promote and showing indifference for universal role? non-democratic countries would be open to democracy when the U.S. stays true to their principles of democracy and the Constitution. Yeah.
All right, well, the proposition, Ramisa, is presented at the beginning. It's kind of buried after you make a policy claim, but it is a claim of fact as it's stated. I think you signpost the secondary points in a preview a little bit, although the phrasing on them is complicated. The problem is that it seems like as you get to each of those points, the information that you're presenting always stays a little abstract. I don't get any source citations on any of the information that you're presenting. There's a vague reference to the Geneva Convention. There's a vague reference to events after the 1991 war, but then the next thing I know you're talking about what happened after the U.S. invasion in 2003. And again, I don't know exactly what laws you're talking about in Iraq or what policies you're discussing there. You mentioned at one point that we appointed English-speaking Iraqis who were sympathetic to our position to positions of power in the government. I don't get a source citation on that. I get and I don't have any historical context about the elections that went on in Iraq, so I'm not sure what's being talked about there. The discussion of habeas corpus seems to be relating to what's going on in Guantanamo, but there's the connection to this idea that we learn visually, we see what other countries are doing, and therefore that's what we're modeling. That seems like a big stretch. It's a weird kind of assertion that you're making there. The notion that some application of the Geneva Convention needs to be made here could be a stronger argument. It would be a lot more certain that's going on here that the Geneva Convention does apply to these detainees. I think that would be good. The one piece of information that you make reference to that I think is an example of a piece of evidence that would be useful is this claim from some CNN documentary, which is being paraphrased at best. It doesn't sound like it's a direct quote, and we definitely were going to need some more information on it to give it credibility, and that's that 90% of those people who were accused on the battlefield were falsely accused. Okay, does that apply to the people who are in Guantanamo, or does that apply to people who were taken into custody? Are they still in custody? I don't know. It's one of those things that it's an interesting statistic, but I don't know what it's based on, and I don't know what it's describing, and that's problematic. That's the big problem with most of the speech, is it's very vague as to what it is you're trying to describe here. It seems like it's hypothetical most of the time, and it's inconsistent between, like I said, references to acts of the U.S. government. There's like a criticism by the you mentioned Republican senators at one point. It sounds to me like they were really talking about the enhanced interrogation techniques as opposed to the detainment of the folks at Guantanamo. So I think you're conflating issues here, and it gets very confusing as to what the inference ultimately is that you're trying to get us to agree to, and that's a problem. All right, thank you.